How's everyone doing on this final day of the GCTC? Excellent. I don't really want to use this, but I was advised that if we want to be heard on the recording, that you need to speak into this. So hi, my name is Greta Knappenberger, for those of you I haven't met. I am with the Verizon Smart Communities team, and I focus on transportation vertical. And I've been with working with the GCTC on the transportation super cluster for about 2 years now. And we're focused on a lot of different areas. The one specific area and we have an action cluster for is on urban freight and logistics. And so for today's session, what we're going to be talking about isn't our specific action cluster project, because one of the goals that we have is to try to make this a two-way dialogue. We've got some great presenters here today, but we kind of want to hear from you as well. What are some of the things that you're thinking about when it comes to urban freight, logistics within your cities, some of the questions and challenges you have? And then what I'm going to pose to you all is, what are some of the projects that you might be working on, or that if you have ideas that you'd like to form an action cluster around, maybe you do. So today we're going to be talking about some of the new technologies that are going to be impacting our urban areas, and so hopefully we'll have some good discussion here as well. So the question we're going to be, as we're going through some of the panelists and everything, is really how is technology going to impact freight delivery? What are some of the new things out there that you've seen or heard that are coming in the future? And then what's out there today? So we've got Stephanie who's going to talk about what's going on in the city of Oakland, Adrian from Portland, and then Eric is also from this area, talking about, going from regional, national level, where are we seeing things going with freight delivery? I don't know if any of you have seen or know what this is. So just last year in October, this is a schematic from Walmart, and they have a patent out for basically like a floating warehouse, where they're going to be having, they'll have all of their things, and then they're going to have drones that are deployed from that to deliver things. Amazon has also put out patents, and then you probably saw City Airbus have their flying taxi drones that came out. So a lot of these are kind of, future technologies that are, being proposed out there. But we're going to kind of take it, go back to the ground for a little while and talk about freight from, kind of the traditional way, from a transportation planning perspective. Talk about some of the secondary impacts that that we're seeing on freight in our cities today, and then really looking into the future. Is this the future of what urban freight and delivery is going to look like for us? I'm going to pivot for just a few seconds, because while most of you have been here since Wednesday, and you've probably heard a lot about the Smart City Challenge and the Global City Team Challenge activities. I want to just spend a couple minutes and talk about kind of how we, personally, how I came to be part of the, working at urban freight and logistics, and where this is stemming from. Out of this initial project that's basically beyond 2045, USDOT was trying to look at, give one city a chance to demonstrate how to solve critical problems. You all know that there were 7 cities that were selected, including the city of Portland. But what they were looking to do was, trying to spur innovation, getting people to think about what are your most creative ideas for innovation around these different areas for transportation. How will we move? We've heard a lot, and Adrian will talk a little bit more about it today, around autonomous and connected vehicles, as well as shared and electric vehicles. We hear a lot about those. But what are some of the ways that cities can think about that? How will we move better as people? So we've heard a lot about Uber and Lyft and shared mobility. I'm going to kind of skip over this one real quickly, but how will we adapt electric vehicle charging infrastructure? Just, the same week, Fourth had their mobility session going on just on the other side of the building. And then how will we align decisions in dollars? So we've heard a lot about sensors, including smart streetlights and whatnot, vehicle traffic, parking, pedestrian bicyclist counts with Vision Zero. We hear a lot of these when you go to the smart city events and even transportation events. And the one that we're going to be talking about today is how are we going to move things? And I don't know about you, but when I go to a lot of events, there's not a lot of talk about freight. Most people see freight as like, oh, that's like long haul trucking, or they don't really understand the impacts that it has, both from traffic congestion, from environmental pollution, as well as, from an economic development perspective. And so the USDOT really laid out kind of these different 12 elements to help guide people in figuring out the areas that they'd like to focus on that will map to all their initiatives. So again, you'll kind of going from like the highest priority to like next highest, from the different elements. We hear a lot about automation and connected vehicles and sensors. We hear a lot about analytics, even the business model smart grid. What we're going to focus on is the urban delivery and logistics. And as we were looking at what kind of action clusters can we form and what kind of projects would really be interesting, that'll have a big impact that not a lot of people are focused on, but they should be. This was really an area that we thought was important. So really, at the end of the day, this vision element includes, use of data, deployment of technologies to reduce congestion, improve safety, and protect the environment for a more efficient supply chain. So, as we hear from some of our speakers today, and then, we'd like to open up the discussion to all of you, what are some of the ways that, you may be using data or technologies to help with the movement of freight? And you'll probably be hearing just some statistics about how the impact of the increase in people using e-commerce and everything is impacting our cities. So with that, I think we're going to start with Stephanie, and Stephanie's going to talk about some of the things that are going on in Oakland, and I'd like to thank Stephanie because she was kind of a last-minute inclusion because one of our speakers wasn't able to come. But through events like this, we're able to have some dialogue and conversations just about what what we're working on, some of the projects that are going on in our city. So I live in Seattle, Stephanie's down in the Bay Area, and through the course of our exchange, she started talking about some of the secondary impacts that she's seeing with some of this technology on things like freight, movement of people, movement of goods, and other areas. So I'd like to welcome Stephanie, and thank you.
Hi.
And I'm going to give you the mic. So Stephanie is one of the brave people who can go without slides.
Yeah. I also didn't have much time, so.
Right.
So hi everyone, nice to meet you. My background is smart city design and solution design, technology, things like that. I jumped into that smart city challenge as well because I knew the CIO of the city of Oakland, and so when it was a call to action, I was introduced to Public Works Department, who was leading that initiative, which is now the Department of Transportation in Oakland, and so we're working together to pull basically the heartbeat of the Bay Area, all these different transportation systems together to figure out the end-to-end kind of movement, or you can put sensors in along the way, the role that the port plays, right, Port of Oakland, and the impacts as that the goods, right, come into the Port of Oakland and then are distributed through the city, and how that impacts the people living right there by the port. So what we've been looking at after the DMT challenge, we thought about that smart goods movement piece. I don't know if everyone here was involved in those projects. It was really interesting to start talking to, say, the Port of Oakland, which we did, and learn about their mega ships that they're planning for. So huge, huge amounts of shipments coming in, and planning for drones, and how do we track the cargo as it gets here, and what is the data that is being used from the point of the port, the endpoint, to the shoreline, right, to getting to the landline, and that transfer of where is the data coming from about the ships and the cargo? How do we transfer it off onto the trucks that are idling in the neighborhood, right, and that are causing air pollution and that are contributing to asthma and cancer in the neighborhood and all of that kind of stuff. That's integrating with the communities who are also doing air pollution, monitoring and connecting basically massive industry to all the people in the neighborhoods. So we've really been focusing on what happens when you move goods through human space and what is the impact on the environment. So we're kind of connecting all of those pieces together. But that includes talking to community members, which a lot of times people don't do in smart city development, right? But what else can I tell you? So Michael Ford is my co-founder of a nonprofit we started called Smart Oakland, so that we could start pulling all this information together. So he works in transportation and mobility, right, which is about more than just transportation. It's about social mobility as well, right? How can we connect even down to the last 50 feet of the human experience in a city, and how can we deal with legacy transportation and delivering things and things like that. But mainly it's the impact of the cargo coming off entering society, right? So, but when we talk about putting all those end-to-end sensors and all the data together, what we started imagining for the Smart City Challenge was, what if we can dynamically load balance the freeways, right? And say there are too many trucks on the freeways, because now we can measure them, right? And we can see the carbon emission and the impact on, the people in every neighborhood, and throttle, the amount of trucks that we're letting onto the freeway. So that's what we've been talking about with Port of Oakland. So that's pretty cool, right? And you route them different ways, but then you also like charge them for their footprint. You get on, you pay, $10 per minute kind of thing. So it's a good way to start managing traffic on the freeway. Along with, there's Uber and everybody else in Tesla too. So we're all starting to get together to talk about how to work together as one big fabric. I guess I'll stop there for a second.
Thank you. Yeah, so no, that's really interesting, and so, I don't know if there's any type of new technologies as well that has been considered to help with some of those efforts on the data collection. And we'll probably hear about how some drones are being used for doing that, right? Or sensor, you'd mentioned some of the sensors, but tying that into some of the freight delivery in different areas.
Well, without pitching myself too much, we actually have a software platform that does that because there aren't software platforms that do that. But from an integrated perspective, being able to consume data sources, or data streams rather, from machines, from user-contributed data, from IoT, devices, and from the port and things like that, we found that there has to be like this third space that can consume data and make it available to different viewers for different reasons. So, but what I want to bring in is drones. But we have that issue of like, constituency is flipped out by drones, right? And for any reason, anywhere in the Bay Area. So it's really difficult. That's why the community engagement is so important, right? To have people understand why you're collecting the data, what it's for, and how it can actually make your life better, right? It's not necessarily coming to look at you, but it could be monitoring the air, and it could be helping make sure this load balancing is possible. And so, your carbon emission in your neighborhood or inside your house is going down, but I think that there's like a lot of protest against drones, but I was just talking to my new friend here about drones, going like, no, it's great, we just have to be able to explain it to people, because that's how I think you get that hover view, right, and you can start to see an integrated heartbeat of a region.
So I guess let me ask a question to the audience. In your communities, or maybe the work you're doing, are there things that you're seeing both today and then looking forward, where you're working with the communities, you're seeing impacts where they're saying, hey, there's a lot of congestion, they're taking up curb space, there's issues on our roads because
they're idling.
They're idling,
waiting
or
for stuff.
any issues. I guess the question to you is, like, what interests you in this area? And, are there things that you're working on or challenges that are similar to what Stephanie's talking about?
So I'm a planning commissioner here in Portland, and we've just done a TSP update, and we put in policy language that will eventually let us regulate AVs for people movement with an eye towards getting shared fleets rather than individual ownership of AVs. We did not put in any AV language around goods movement, and I guess I see it primarily as how do we get the SOBs out of the way of the goods movement. I don't know if you have any thoughts about good policy directions that head in that direction. We haven't really factored in the goods movement part of all the automation stuff.
Well, I was just, congratulations to the city of Portland for passing this charter yesterday, right, about this smart city. How do we make decisions about what we buy and what we bring into the environment, and data and this inclusion, and like that perspective of, but I would say that, get that on the docket fast. Don't let that get too far out of the gate before you definitely include, shipments and movement, right? Because, I know you guys don't have, you don't have a port, but the fact is you do get, supplies through the channels, right? There are too many factors to, because you know how long it takes to pass things in city hall and everything, right? Like, you got to get on the jump on the smart city bandwagon, right? Get everything on the list now so that you can address it later, because it's a huge thing to miss, right? And it will definitely shut things down later.
Yeah, I just wonder about the interaction, because we talked about dynamically balancing the freeways by routing trucks.
Yeah.
90% of the vehicles on the freeways are single occupancy vehicles, so it's about the mix.
Oh, here, sorry, yeah.
Component. Yeah.
We have a ton of trucks on.
I guess, yeah, your report it would be different.
Yeah.
Up on Marine Drive, it might be different, but that's not our choke point.
So I see what you're
How do
saying.
you get at the interaction between the SOBs and the freight? Think about that in a holistic way.
Yeah, well, I mean, I
With an
guess
eye towards giving priority to the freight. That's more economic.
it's like the opposite of what we're doing, right?
Right, yeah, I mean, there are complaints from people in the SOBs who are stuck in traffic. But
Yeah.
when I look at the economy of the region,
Yeah.
moving the freight is more important than getting somebody across the river
Mhm.
to Target to shop without sales tax, right?
Interesting, yeah. Well, I think it all has to do with incentives, right? But it has to be the individual level. I don't know if you guys saw the Tel Aviv pitch yesterday, where they have like that incentive card for each individual, and you're like, it's almost like live Groupons or something, like, hey, get off the freeway. And I did a future of LA project that was based on that incentive, like human movement too, like just change the behavior and get people off the freeways. I think that's great. Yeah, check out the Tel Aviv pitch, that was great. I would recommend that one. Okay.
One other comment on the policy side. I'm from Idaho. One other comment on the policy side and getting in front of the problem. I'm from Idaho, and the Idaho legislature 2 months ago passed their first unmanned vehicle law for the state, which is, in the Idaho way, very restrictive with respect to uninformed observation of anything, really. They exclude some things, but very few, and it becomes civil penalties.
Yeah.
If you inadvertently overstep your bounds. And so that's the law, but in the public space, shooting drones down is potentially a new sport over there.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. They have
so how do you get ahead of that kind of stuff, right? It's almost, they didn't put anything about last mile delivery in there at all.
Right, and so, I'm sorry, they're recording, so they asked if we talk into this. I brought this up, and actually, the Seattle Department of Transportation, in partnership with UW's Supply Chain and Transportation and Logistics Group, they have two really interesting studies that you may want to look at. One is the final 50 feet for urban delivering goods, and that's kind of the basis of our initial action cluster that we've formed. The second one is they have a freight mobility plan that they put out last year, and happy to share that with you as well. But it's probably one of the only ones that I've seen lately that is kind of all-encompassing on how they're managing the movement of goods and freight and addressing some of these issues like the ones that you've talked about. And we're all along the same Cascadia Innovation Corridor. We're all connected through I-5 and everything. And so there's different challenges down here. There may be some things, and again, in the spirit of the Global City Team Challenge of looking at how can we take some of these plans and programs that we've done in other cities and replicate them in areas that will meet kind of the needs here and everything. So
That's a good point. Maybe we could just do a quick, like the education supercluster, the newly formed one. I think maybe we could start surfacing some of these
Derek's
plans.
here.
Right, yeah, Derek's here.
Our chair.
Right. As we're just thinking about, things that we could share, like patterns of work and like your work in 50 feet. Like we'll start sharing that right through the education supercluster.
Yeah, and then anything that you're working on down here will be, one of those things we'll probably want to share. So, great. Well, thanks. So in the interest of time, I think, Adrian, I'm going to pull up your slides next.
All right.
And then Adrian's going to talk us through some good stuff.
So we're going to really test the technology here and see if we can not only look at slides, but run a video here in a couple minutes. I haven't done anything, Greta, to sort of filter the YouTube factor, so there'll be like an ad for the first 4 seconds that we have to skip, and we're gonna have to turn off the sound if there is any sound and all that stuff. So I'm Adrian Piermine.
Do you want to come up here so they can put a video?
Oh, the video?
Yeah.
All right.
Your big debut film here.
Not quite my debut.
Yeah, in freight,
It's
right?
been a long week. It is my debut in freight, that's true. So I'm Adrian Piermine. I'm with the transportation consulting firm DKS Associates. I'm our national director of smart cities and connected vehicles. And this is my debut in freight. I've been talking a lot about connected and autonomous vehicles. And one of the things that I've found really interesting is how little we talk about freight when we talk about the future of mobility and transportation. We spend so much time, we're so geeked out on Uber and Lyft and Waymo and all these people-moving autonomous companies. And yet, I think one of the things that's really going to change mobility and the way that we use our roads and our infrastructure, and thank you, Chris, for bringing it up. I'm actually glad that the city didn't try to figure out regulation on something that they're not even thinking about yet. Hopefully, they can start talking about it, like you're saying, and then figure out if there is a policy that we want to put in place to encourage the kind of behavior we want out of this new emerging thing. But right now, we're not even talking about it yet. So let's start talking about it first to figure out what the policy implication should be. But we're so focused on the people moving in this new space that I tend to believe, and it'll be, I'm really looking forward to your whole presentation, that the quiet beast behind a lot of things, Amazon, is going to probably change mobility in as big a way as Waymo is, in the way that we use our streets and our curbs. And again, we're not talking about it yet. So I don't even remember what slides I've got here, so let's find out. So yesterday I talked, I'm not sure how many people saw the presentation, but I was talking a little bit about the relationship between connected vehicles and autonomous vehicles, because we tend to bundle this up as CAV, connected and autonomous vehicles, as though it's a single thing. And yet very few people unpackage that to say what are these two different things and how are they related. So maybe show of hands, like who saw this yesterday, and should I just skip over this part of the conversation, or should I kind of do a little bit of it? Oh boy, half and half, what do I do now?
Just keep going.
Okay, well, so connected vehicles can be zero autonomy. They can be just my car is a 2004 Jeep Cherokee, and I put a dongle into the onboard diagnostics port to be part of the state of Oregon's road user charge program, and now all of a sudden my car is communicating over the cellular network and sending the state data about my movements, and I turned a 2004 Jeep Cherokee into a connected vehicle. It has almost no autonomy. Autonomous vehicles are, as we've generally known them, self-driving cars. Uber, Lyft, Waymo, all these different companies are playing around in the space. For the most part, they are not connected vehicles right now. For the most part, they are fully autonomous. They're using a bunch of sensors, and they're using onboard technology to know where they are and to sense the universe around them. Eventually, they should all end up being connected vehicles, because that will just be one more piece of technology that is telling the car what is going on around it and seeing around the curves, seeing from the infrastructure and seeing from other connected vehicles that there's pedestrians in the sidewalk that they're about to turn right onto, that there's a fire truck coming down this corridor. Connected vehicle should just make our autonomous vehicles smarter. So in the connected vehicle space, we talk about vehicle to vehicle, so cars talking to other cars, trucks talking to other trucks, trucks talking to cars, and vehicle to infrastructure. So our vehicles talking to infrastructure that we on the, most of my work is with cities and counties and state DOTs that are trying to figure out what sort of infrastructure do I need to put into place to get ready for this world of vehicle to infrastructure. So we want to invest in infrastructure either on the cellular network side or locally at intersections and dedicated short-range communication to be able to tell cars, tell trucks, tell any connected vehicle, here's what's going on in your environment. Like I said earlier, you're about to turn right onto this corner, there are pedestrians in the sidewalk. Okay, that's pretty useful information. On the autonomous side, as I was talking about, this is where we always focus. All of our attention is on these cars that look like four-door sedans with some equipment strapped on them. Increasingly, we're starting to talk about little passenger mover, 10, 12-person shuttles driving around our neighborhoods. That's wonderful. We've seen this for quite some time. Long-haul trucks here in Portland, Daimler bought Freightliner a few years ago, and it has quietly, between Daimler Freightliner and Mercedes, which is part of Daimler, is the largest truck manufacturer in the world, I believe. And they've just announced that they're going to open their autonomous vehicle research center here in Oregon. And they're largely going to be focused on these kinds of self-driving cars. But this is the thing that interests me the most. And again, I can't wait to see you have you either prove me totally wrong or prove some of my stuff right. But for a long time, we've been talking about how drones are going to be delivering packages to your door. And I've just had this really hard time picturing the distribution center out in Gresham being an airport of drones flying all over Portland and coming 7 miles over and dropping off a package on my door and then 7 miles back. Like, why does that make any more sense than the way that we're doing things? But this combination of local delivery truck, drone, and even local delivery robot, Starship Technologies, I think they're called, is what I think is really going to change things. And I'm pretty sure that Amazon, who has figured out how to automate their distribution centers, is going to figure out how to automate distribution to my doorstep in the coming years. I'm not going to spend any time on the 5 levels of automation. I didn't get to geek out yesterday too much on the deep dive into autonomous, so I'll do just a little bit here on how the technology works. So it's a combination of onboard computer, GPS, high-resolution mapping so the vehicle knows where it is. The high-resolution piece is not just I know I'm on this road, but I'm actually in this lane and I think I'm this many centimeters away from the white stripe on the right. And then a suite of sensors that are confirming, yes, I am as far away from the right-hand stripe that I thought I was, and what else is around me. Situational awareness. Are there pedestrians? Are there bikes? Are there cars? Are there other things? A suite of sensors, and you guys have probably seen this a version of this slide a few million times by now if you've been in enough of these conferences, but a combination of radar, LiDAR, camera, ultrasound. I'm not as familiar with ultrasound, honestly, but it's a combination of sensors, and it's going to vary vehicle type by vehicle type of exactly what combo it is, but it's this combo that gives the vehicle the situational awareness piece. And this is one of the few places where I'm suspecting, or Elon Musk is right in many, many things. He's wrong occasionally. He seems to believe that cameras are going to be good enough to do self-driving cars. And I personally believe that LiDAR is going to always be a requirement of really safe self-driving cars. So I'm not buying my Tesla until he gets on my line of thinking. But back to Elon and Tesla, this is a really cool online video if you haven't seen it, to get a sense for what the car sees when it's driving down the road. So this particular video, and I'm not saying this because I'm going to switch gears into freight here in just a second. As the car's driving down the road, you're looking over the driver's shoulder, never once touches the steering wheel, never once touches gas or brakes. It's a real video. Driving down through the streets, he encounters things like construction site and cones and works his way around that, but you get to see what the car is seeing from its different sensors. And so if you want to geek out on self-driving cars, it's a good one. And this is kind of the oversimplified version of this, but that's what the car is doing, and that's what this suite of sensors are doing, is trying to, in the situational awareness side, what is it that I'm seeing around me? I'm seeing vans, I'm seeing streetlights, I'm seeing bikes and pedestrians. So we've talked about this, the many use cases of autonomous. And with that, I'm going to roll the dice here and see how we do with the video. What's that? Oh, you already...
You're in the technology, right?
Yeah, right.
Have you guys seen those, like, the little little guys driving around, you saw the little delivery, it looks like an ice chest with wheels.
We
Have you seen those?
We don't have any of those in Portland yet.
Yeah, I
They're in
saw them in
San
DC
Francisco.
last year,
Yeah.
it was hilarious, it was like, we just saw it driving down the street, down the sidewalk, we were having lunch, and then it just, anyway, I just felt like you could just pick it up and just walk away with it, but zaps it or something, I don't know.
Did I crash your system?
You did, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Here. All right, here's. I'm gonna get the exciting music.
It's not up here though.
Oh, it's not gonna be, okay, let's try it again. This is where.
Yeah. And I actually don't want the music to play because it doesn't actually do anything for it. I kind of wanted to talk while this was going on.
Okay, there.
So when I stumbled across this work, Mercedes is going all in on all the OEMs right now, all the auto manufacturers are trying to figure out how they're going to stay relevant as we go into this brave new autonomous vehicle world. And so Mercedes is looking at these vans around this size and trying to figure out how are we going to make these things move people and make these things move goods and stay at the center of the action. And so this was the first time that I really saw how those local delivery robots and those local delivery drones actually make sense to me on how companies like Amazon are going to use them to do that last 50 feet that you're showing us in the SDOT slide. But this concept of a robot inside the van going over and saying, okay, package in shelf A7 goes to drone number 1. So the van has already driven out to my neighborhood and stopped at a hopefully, Chris, pre-approved spot for delivery van stop, and then starts to deploy the last 50-foot delivery system. And I'm like, oh, that's how drones are actually going to be used in this whole thing. It's not going to be coming all the way from Gresham. It's going to be coming from the end of my block. And they have a driver's seat in there right now because we're going to have to transition for the next decade or so. So it'll be human beings that do this for the first few years, drive out to your neighborhood, and then deploy the last 50-foot drones. And then eventually this compartment can go away too, and that van can just come out and do it. This is really cool. Insert cartridge of local delivery. So I don't really have much more to say about this. I just wanted to present this to folks because when I stumbled across this, that was my big aha, that the freight side of how our roads are going to be used in our local neighborhoods and in our cities is going to change as much as the human side of this, and it feels like it's the thing we never talk about at any of the transportation conferences. And so I just want to I was thankful when Greta gave me the opportunity to come up and start talking freight, and I just want to start showing this video to other folks. So with that, we'll just let it play, and then we can start just talking, doing
Yeah,
Q&A.
no, there's.
And we'll need to stop it because you know how YouTube will go on to whatever
Yeah,
random
next
video.
thing,
Like,
oh yeah.
no idea what's next. Okay. Any thoughts, comments, questions?
Yeah,
or
so
how do you
what do you guys think? So I mean, we've covered things, you know, from connected autonomous vehicles and then how it's going to, you know, you start seeing self-driving trucks, we'll see connected vehicles that have drones attached to them.
Okay, I don't know how to stop this because I can't see what's going on
Okay.
on the computer, so let's.
We'll see what's coming up next.
You want to do Q&A right now, or do you want to
Yeah,
see
no, it'd be
more drone,
great.
or do you want some more drone stuff, and then we can? I wouldn't mind doing the Skyward presentation and like figuring out how all three of us
All three could
sort of panel it up.
figure out, I know, sorry, I'm like.
I'm curious. Do you see anyone yet moving from like a cargo to this? Like, how do you get from off the boat and the freight that comes in that direction that gets into like micro delivery right down to the neighborhood?
Well, I mean, we've already been, our freight logistics industry forever has been going cargo container onto truck into a big local distribution center,
Right.
take the packages off and get them into smaller trucks.
Right.
To be honest with you, I don't see a massive change in that space, except I do think that the truck that's going from the port to the distribution center is going to be increasingly automated and to the point where it's autonomous. There was talk yesterday in the session about the idea that it's sort of remote controlled, if you will, from port to freeway, and then autonomous on freeway, and then remote control again once it gets into a distribution center. So somebody's actually driving the truck from a control center somewhere, and then dropping off all the packages, and then. But as far as how that gets, I'm sorry, I was saying this. I'd say ask Amazon. They're the ones that are gonna figure out the.
Yeah.
See the little button? That.
Sorry.
Oh, we just went on.
Go first. You guys keep talking about yourself while we figure this
I can just go ahead and get started while she's working on it. I'm Eric Ringer. I'm a co-founder and director of aviation technology at Skyward, now a Verizon company as of almost a year and a half ago. I got my start in aviation working for NASA and Sikorsky contractors. For Sikorsky, I worked on a few different programs. One of them is CH-53K, the Marine's new Humvee hauling helicopter. And then I moved into the drone industry in 2012, back before commercial drones were actually even legal. We had at least seen enough indication from the FAA that they were going to be legal, so I thought, rising tide lifts all boats, why not try to put a boat in the water? And so we founded Skyward and eventually settled on doing fleet and operations management for anybody who's using drones commercially. And I'll get into a little bit about what that means, but we have seen folks using drones all across a bunch of different industries. And we've seen significant growth in the number of drones that are out there, not only the number of drones, but the number of people flying drones. There are over 1 million, I think about 1.2 or almost 1.25 million aircraft that are registered. To give you a little sense of how the regulations have changed, in 2016 there were 250,000 aircraft registered, and now we're at 1.25 million. So in the last 2 years we've had over 1 million aircraft registered, both hobbyist and commercial. And that's largely because the drone regulations were published in 2016. And the FAA predicts that there will be up to 6 million hobbyist and commercial drones in the US by 2021. And today we have over 100,000 or about 100,000 certified commercial drone pilots as well. So how are those drones being used? Well, at Skyward we see people using drones in all kinds of industries, from using them to get new angles to report on news. In telecom, we ourselves at Verizon are using drones for cell phone tower inspections. We see them a lot in construction, getting new views of the construction site, reporting on progress of the construction site, helping with the information modeling for the construction sites. A lot of different use cases there in mining, understanding the integrity of certain parts of the mine, volumetric analysis, a lot of stuff going on there. Folks are using Skyward to help manage and scale their operations. Just tangibly what that means, we don't do the flying actually, we don't make any drones, but we wrap the drone program to help people once they establish the ROI for their drone program. We help them scale it, manage it, get the buy-in that they need higher up in the organization to establish trust, mitigate risk, and that looks like making sure that, or having a platform like what Skyward offers to do airspace analysis, an interactive drone airspace map, getting automated access to airspace, having a collaboration point for your crews, scheduling your crews, managing all the equipment, all in one place. So today, as I mentioned, people are using drones largely in more sensor type of applications because they're small and they're easy to put up. In precision agriculture, I mentioned volumetrics, stockpile estimation. There's a customer of ours who works for a major, I'll say, charcoal manufacturer, and they use drones to measure their wood chip piles. So every time I light up a smoker, I know the drones were a part of them making them. And then even into the indoor scanning applications, which can kind of help for big facilities as we start moving a little bit more into supply chain applications for big facilities like distribution centers. There's crossover into the construction of those and using drones there, and also facilities management. Instead of getting a lift out, just sticking a tiny little drone up in the air and getting a little better view of an issue that might be happening or that they need to inspect. So moving further into the supply chain though, we get a little bit more into proof of concept type of, I would say, drone applications. They're not fully scaled yet. The one that obviously comes to mind is Amazon using drones for delivery, but it's not just that. There are a lot of different ways to use drones. And I want to say drones, the word drone, and for most people it refers to the small guys, the ones that you buy at Best Buy and you put it in the air. What that is actually indicating though is a set of capabilities for autonomous vehicles that are now airborne. And while small UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, are the ones that are seeing rapid adoption right now, there is room on the spectrum to move up into the larger vehicles that can move freight around as well. So the smaller ones, as I said, are getting the more rapid adoption. So that's where we're seeing a lot more of the R&D activities and the proof of concept stuff. The ones that I have seen done most that I think are actually getting to scale fastest are more in the inventory management side of things. That's using still the sensors on the drone to work on inventory accuracy. And so you can literally in a quarter of the time go scan an entire warehouse with the drone and compare that to what your inventory management system says is the truth versus what the drone has actually discovered is the truth. And so if you're a major consumer packaged goods company that has 95% inventory accuracy, if you can move that up toward 100% through the use of drones, that's saving you millions of dollars a year. What we're seeing now more in getting the goods out of the warehouse and into people's hands is more of the last mile delivery type stuff with Amazon, Matternet, who I believe partnered with Mercedes for some of that drone video that we saw, Zipline, Project Wing from Google, a lot of different companies trying to solve the equation for getting goods to the consumer. And there are a lot of different issues that have to be solved, not just are people comfortable with that happening or where they're going to land, but also technologically and regulatory. So today, beyond visual line of sight, as you see in the bottom right corner, is not allowed. So flying a drone outside of where the pilot can see it is illegal. That's largely because in traditional manned aviation, you've got the pilot in the cockpit. They're able to conduct what's called sense and avoid, where they can see any object that might be coming near them. Other manned aircraft is the most logical one, but geese are up there too. And so the way that the FAA is going about, I would say working with the industry to prove out that technology, optical flow, as I think Elon is pretty fond of, for navigation and for obstacle detection. There's a certain rapidness or speed that has to happen when you have airborne vehicles as well. And if you're flying toward the sun, then that's not going to work so well. So I agree. There's definitely a problem with that specific technology. But regardless, it's about kind of decentralizing the decision making. So now we've moved the pilot from not in the cockpit, but being on the ground. And they've got the drone maybe 50, 100, 1,000, a whole mile, 5 miles away from the pilot. How can you decentralize the decision making so it's not the pilot that's making the decision, it's not air traffic control that's making the decision, but it's the pilot's decision making process and sensor inputs now on the drone itself. That has to be mixed with the communications technologies so that just like with the autonomous vehicles on the ground, where you have vehicle to infrastructure communication, you have vehicle to vehicle communication so that drone can talk with other drones and other manned aircraft, but also so that drone can communicate where it is to the business system that's even deploying it in the first place. Beyond that, we also see some mixed use cases. So talking about freight, moving things across the country, we've seen even the small consumer drones being used by BNSF to do some railway inspections, to go out ahead of the vehicles or the trains to make sure that the right-of-ways are clear and to do inspections just to speed up the workers' jobs that are normally kind of doing this as boots on the ground. So we see them as used also as just another tool in the toolkit for already workers who are trained to do a certain job. So some of the obstacles that we are getting over as an industry so that we can use drones even more so in the supply chain is kind of practical assessment. Where is a drone the right tool for the job? And making sure that we recognize when a drone is not the right tool for the job. In some cases, especially in inventory management work that we have done, sometimes it's better to use a GoPro on a stick than it is to put a drone up in the air. So we have to look at some of the different value drivers, time, cost, quality, and safety, where drones can fit versus something else. We also are looking at the economics of data capture. So IoT is driving the mass adoption of fixed sensors. Drones are an opportunity for mobile sensors. So there's some times where it's impractical to deploy a whole set of fixed sensors when a mobile sensor is probably a lot cheaper and much more flexible. I think certain types of air pollution inspections are a good example of that. And then the economics of delivery. So like above, time, weight, and cost modeling. You see I've used I used the Mercedes example there. Mixed mode options are a big one, and public versus private infrastructure. So a lot of the big issues that come out with actually doing the delivery, the range of the aircraft is one of them. How much the aircraft can carry is another. But that's also the delivery mechanisms. You can deliver to somebody's door on a farm a whole lot easier than you can to somebody who lives in a condo. And so in higher density cities, if we're talking about the downtown area for Portland as an example, we have to look now. I think personally, I have better outlook for hub and spoke type models where you're delivering to maybe a mailbox center. And then that mailbox center might be automated. And so like Amazon's lockers, I have a feeling that that's going to be part of Amazon's rollout strategy for drones. And so there are definitely a lot of mixed mode applications for using drones. But all of this drones in supply chain is all part of a bigger revolution in industry. If you guys aren't familiar with Industry 4.0, it's all about kind of putting sensors on things and connecting everything together. There's some core principles for Industry 4.0, interoperability, information transparency, technical assistance, and decentralized decisions. That's that one that I talked about with the drone itself. So there's in industry what we're seeing, not the drone industry, but actually consumer packaged goods companies, logistics providers, they're having to confront this revolution that's going on and figure out if they're going to be a leader in it, if they're going to outsource a lot of the technical innovation to other companies, maybe to their distribution centers that are run by third parties. But they have to figure out where they stand in that and how much they want to go about taking advantage of the adoption. But drones, as I mentioned, as mobile sensors, as a connected device, it's an inherently connected device. It fits really within this greater revolution. It's not just about drones. Drones are another autonomous vehicle, and these autonomous vehicles are both decentralized and connected, most optimally. So then as we get into drones and freight tomorrow, if we're talking about them flying in our cities, delivering in our cities, even in our suburban areas and our rural areas, we have to figure out the policies that strike the right balance, so that it's not just Amazon who's kind of charged through establishing their private right-of-ways in the sky and to get into our cities. Just like helicopters are able to land on rooftops, they're zoned to be able to land there. So then the question is, how do we work as a city, but then also as property owners, to be able to support that infrastructure of tomorrow, where drones, much smaller vehicles, are able to come and go from rooftops. And now we have essentially what becomes a new, I'd say, public good of the airspace, where that's another thing that the city has to manage in a much more hands-on way than what they typically would have done, because most, if not all of the airspace is governed by the FAA, and the city comes into play where the vehicles touch the ground, which normally is pretty centralized. We've got PDX, we have established airports, and we have a handful of heliports in the city. But these heliports are going to become much more, or the desire at least is going to become much more frequent in number. So this is playing out a little bit interestingly as we look at where the FAA has jurisdiction. Traditionally, the FAA has exclusive power to regulate the airspace from an inch off the ground and up. But we've never had vehicles that routinely operate at such a human level, kind of in our cities. And so what that's led to is cities passing a lot of rules that make it pretty difficult for drone operators to actually do work. So yes, we can check the airspace. This is a screenshot from Skyward showing the drone airspace. But as a drone pilot, I not only have to check the airspace, but I also have to check the local city rules, and not just the city rules, but possibly even if there's a park that's not under city jurisdiction, but maybe under national jurisdiction, to see if I can even take off or land there. For example, in the city of Portland, the parks, you're not allowed to use radio-controlled vehicles. So whether that's a radio-controlled boat, or a car, or a drone. And so while the FAA has power over the airspace, you have to take off and land from somewhere. And so that's where we're talking about. It becomes very, very difficult, very confusing for a lot of our customers to figure out where they even can fly, because they have to check multiple sources. It ends up being a patchwork quilt of rules. The FAA and the greater Department of Transportation recognizes that this is a problem, and so they've established an UAS integrated pilot program. They announced a few of the participants last month, and their mission is really to put power in the city's hands to figure out what the right balance is. What are the security issues that we need to consider? What's the traffic management issues that they need to consider, so that they can, the governments, the balance between federal and local can strike the right balance of rules and policies and guidelines, at least to establish the policies, to both encourage the advancing of technology, but do so in a way that is measured and I'd say appropriate for what the city and the constituents in the city have an appetite for. So the thing is to be careful. If we're not, when we go about establishing our own regulations for this new technology in the city, we can end up making things overly complicated and just squelching innovation. So we're really at an important crossroads in robotics, and especially aerial robotics. But this could be a new public good to take advantage of. So the questions that we should be asking ourselves are, how do we establish air traffic management in the city? How can this public good become a new revenue generating model for the city or the state, whoever is ultimately taking over that jurisdiction? How do we take zoning, or how do we take the use of drones and drones for delivery into our zoning laws? A lot of different issues come up like that we need to be considering, especially as we talk about getting freight goods finally to those constituents that are part of our cities. So with that, welcome questions and conversation here.
Thank you, Aaron. Any questions? If not, I'm going to pick on some of you because I know you probably have some questions. So yes.
So the same TSP update discussion where we sort of shied away from automated freight, we also looked at, do we know enough to start talking about drones or not, and said we're not smart enough yet. But I thought I understood that the FAA had pretty much defined a height level where they were going to worry about everything above that, and the cities would worry about everything below that. Can you comment on that?
I would say that's not a published rule in any way. The drones in Class G airspace, which is the more rural areas, are allowed up to 400 feet. If we go back to that map of Portland, so that the blue pin there is kind of essentially where we are right now. So we're right on the edge of Portland's Class C airspace. Within that, so this shape that we're seeing here is the traditional Class C airspace that manned aircraft have to worry about. For drones, there's a new updated map that shows graduated levels as we get closer to the actual airport, where they can go 400 feet, 300 feet, 200 feet, 100, and down below. But as far as jurisdiction of the FAA, it's an inch off the ground and up. For now. I think that's what's being worked out right now, and that's one of the things that they're trying to study through the UAS integrated pilot programs.
Any other questions? So we've got probably about 5-10 minutes. I think I kind of want to open it up for just general discussion, because I think we've heard some really interesting things, and kind of where we started the discussion off is, how is technology going to impact urban freight? So we've heard about kind of some of the environmental aspects in some of the other areas. We've heard about the autonomous and connected vehicles, and then some of the future of what's going on. And we're really seeing that there's going to be an impact, it could be from the community side, from the public policy and regulation side, and then just in general impacting transportation. So I'd be interested in just hearing from you, whether you're from Portland or you work, in policy and regulation, if you have if you're work for a company like Fireware that has sensors, or if you're in California working in education, working with the next generation of workforce, Derek, on things like drones and introducing them to these types of technologies, but and bringing it back to freight, which is again a topic that you don't hear a lot about, but we've got these new technologies that are coming out, and just love to just get perspectives on from the sensor perspective, policy, education, or any rest of you that I may have not met this week at this event. What do you guys think? Are these things that you're exploring and that you're interested in, or do you think this is something just like blockchain, another trend that where people are looking at but might not be applicable to our communities as we look to expand these technologies?
As you were presenting, I just emailed DJI because they're in our program. So Brandon,
So it's DJI?
Yeah, DJI is the largest consumer drone company in the world at the moment. I think they dominate like 60% of the entire market. It's those white drones with the 4 prongs you see flying everywhere in the world. And they're in our program. So Brandon Monolo, he was the university relations manager, but now he's working at enterprise. But I went to their conference in Palo Alto just about 3 months ago. They released their payload SDK. And the payload is basically, traditionally with DJI, you have their heat mapping sensor, you have their cameras or whatever, but now they actually released the ability for you to remove what that payload is that they have prescribed, and add any sensor to it now on their own platform. So that kind of just blew my mind, because now we can really do anything with these drones that we want to, as we wish. So, and we're working with programs with them. So my question for you is, what are you doing around, this is a hard question for a lot of the high-tech, high-growth companies, but what are you doing around entrepreneurship, workforce development in this area? What's the importance of younger people in building this market?
It depends on, I guess, where you see the intersection. So I think there's two areas to approach. One are those who are actually going to be going into the science and engineering to develop the aircraft and work with sensors and actually, can actually do the engineering to work with the payload SDK in that example. And then the other side is actually the deployment of the aircraft. And the big trend in the drone industry right now is because of how easy DJI has made it to use the drones, and because of how approachable getting a remote pilot certificate is, we see a lot of our customers who are actually training up their existing workforce to use drones, to be certified as a remote pilot and to be equipped with a drone to help them do their job better. A good example of that is in insurance. So if you imagine a storm coming through, hail damage on roofs in a neighborhood, an insurance company that deploys their team of claims adjusters out there to go assess the damage and help their policyholders. Now, instead of having to call in ladder calls every time and put people up in harm's way on roofs, they can pull the drone out of their trunk, put it up in the air, take a few pictures of the roof, and they're able to put that into their claims system and get much quicker data and more, probably even higher quality data about the damage, and allow the policy or the claims adjuster more time to do what the policy or what the claims adjusters are there for and what humans are really good at, and that's working with other humans to help their policyholders feel better about the attention that they're getting and the speed at which their concerns are being met. And so that actually the use of drones is another area. What we are doing for that, I know that I've just recently spoken or worked with a woman from Lane County, a teacher there who is working on developing programs in her high school, so I've been giving some advice about how to equip these students who maybe school isn't their traditional schooling is not the thing that speaks to them best, but hands-on activities are good, skilled trades are really good, and giving them, helping to equip them to be contributive members of the workforce. That's the extent of it that I can speak to about our company in particular, but I know that there are plenty of other companies out there that are doing more work.
So I'm actually glad that you're here and bringing sort of a different perspective to this whole conversation. I was in the Connected Autonomous session yesterday and presenting there, and the moderator asked each of us panelists a question at the end. It was like, what are you most excited about and what are you most scared about with these new emerging technologies? And so the excited part for me is the safety impacts of autonomous vehicles and connected vehicles. And I'm actually a traffic engineer by education and trade, and that's what ultimately, all this great technology is fun to geek out on, but I want the safety impacts. I'm super excited about that. What I'm most scared about is the job displacement that's going to come with automation of so many of these driving jobs. Truck drivers, bus drivers, cab drivers, Lyft drivers, so many jobs are going to go away with this whole thing. And it's one of the things that you don't hear very much about in the technology conferences and even in the transportation conferences is this job displacement piece. And usually when you do hear it, it's mentioned in a way that almost sounds like, so therefore we should stop progress or slow progress because we don't want all these jobs to be displaced. And I'm not saying it that way. The positives of all this emerging automation technology, I think, far outweigh the negatives. But what we do need to talk about is, what are we gonna do about all that job displacement? And so some of the things you're describing are these future jobs that weren't even a consideration a year or two ago. And we need to be thinking societally about what those new jobs look like, what they might possibly be. Probably need to all start reading more science fiction about what the future might look like, but work that all the way back down through our education system so that when our kids are hitting the workforce, that they're actually educated and trained for those new jobs. So I love, just talking about these like new insurance applications. What are the things that we're going to be able to do with these new technologies? And what are the new jobs going to be to build, to maintain and operate, and then the new jobs that are now enabled that weren't even there before. And we got to create some serious task force working around what that looks
I
like.
want to comment on that real quick. We went to the city of Portland's council approval for the priorities framework for equity and inclusion yesterday, and they approved of it. It was freaking phenomenal. I mean, basically what it is, it's an equity and inclusion prioritization within a smart city master plan for the city of Portland, focusing on that as the main thing. The example I'm giving is, if you can put a 1 megawatt solar system with a battery storage system on top of a low income housing, and then allow the people who are in as tenants to benefit from the wealth, building of that, I think that's what we're talking about with transportation systems. I mean, as we see high school kids in the Bay Area start to kind of like go into internship programs and stuff like that, transportation is the biggest problem. They can't even get somewhere. And so, but they do say, what do you have access to? Do you have your mom or dad drive you? Do you have, your own car? Do you have whatever this? They say Uber and Lyft a lot. And so I think the key thing here is that we're not just displacing their job, we're also saving them money. So I think that's maybe how we can look at it too, is that maybe it's just there's less cost, it's parity around, cost savings. Maybe is one way of looking at it. Savings rather than money generated.
Just a quick time check. We've got probably about 5 minutes before the next session starts, so maybe Stephanie, you've got final comments? And then
Yeah, just to sort of take that down to the next level down, right, which is that entrepreneurship. I like the idea of the corporations and sort of the government not just being the benefactors of these new air control systems and delivery channels, right? There are 330 million people in this country, right? They could also look at that as a development platform for building their own businesses, right? And I'm really excited about that, bringing that delivery channel to all sorts of people who will build all kinds of cool new applications for all of us, and build their own wealth in the community. So, just the touching point there.
Great. Well, thank you, and thank you all. Do you have some comment?
I had a quick question,
Oh, yeah,
but I
sure,
don't know
of
if we
course.
have time.
Oh, no, we have
I'm just
time.
wondering, what are the next steps in order to scale autonomous freight?
Next steps for scaling autonomous freight.
I think we're out of time.
Yeah. Actually, I'd like to pose a question back to you all, because you all came here thinking, oh, this is going to be a session on freight. But as you see, we've covered a lot of different topics and things that have cross-cutted everything from education, transportation, even can impact energy systems, public safety, connectivity, all these things. So, what we're looking to do is build out some, find pilot projects or activities that you're all working on that, we can start exploring some of these different topic areas, whether it's in the workforce development, policy, how to actually build these out and what that looks like going forward. So we have blueprints. So whether you're in Portland or you're down in the Bay Area, you can take this kind of information back to your communities and you can start building things out. So if you have any takeaway from today's meeting, it's just, think about freight, think about how it impacts your communities, your lives, the different areas that might be important, and then let's share some of that information so we can keep this discussion going forward at our next GCTC event in February.
I do want to say something, because I don't know the answer. Just like the same way when the city was thinking about what policies they want to put in place around this, and said we barely started asking the questions, and so we definitely don't know the answer yet. But we need to start asking those questions. And what the city of Portland has thought a lot about is what they want autonomous vehicles to look like in the way that they move people. And so they've set very specific policies to try to drive it away from unoccupied vehicles driving all around town and and going back out to Beaverton and coming back in and picking you up, and really trying to drive policy toward shared autonomous vehicles. So they thought through what they want it to look like, so then they can craft policy around driving the industry toward what they want it to look like. I think we need to start having the same conversation around freight. What do we want that to look like? And our curb space, putting drones aside, let's go back just to wheeled vehicles for a minute, which is largely what we're going to have to be wrestling with for some time. Our curb space is going to be managed very differently 5 and 10 years from now than it has been historically. We're going to need to be removing a whole lot of parking and need to start getting into a lot of 3 to 5 minute pickup and drop off zones. We're thinking a lot about that for what we want Uber and Lyft and Car2Go and the different shared people moving scenarios to look like. We need to be having that same conversation around goods. Because it's not just Amazon. We keep saying Amazon, but I mean, Uber Eats, there's so many different new shared ways that smaller packages are getting picked up and dropped off. So I think just we need to start having that conversation around the same way that we've thought about what we want autonomous people movers to look like. We're going to need to start talking about what we want autonomous goods movers to look like and craft our policy around what we want to see in the future.
So based on that answer, it sounds like the biggest barrier would be creating a regulatory and policy framework in order to operate?
I think that if we don't create policy around what we want it to look like, it's going to happen to us. So if there is no policy telling Amazon that they can't have a self-driving shuttle that's also then coming into my neighborhood and drones are flying off of it, they're going to do it. And if we're okay with it just being done to us the way that makes the best sense for the industry, then we're going to get what we get. If we want to start thinking about what we want it to look like, then we can craft policy that drives it a certain direction. But it's going to happen. And right now we don't have policy that can stop it or even guide it in a certain direction.
Well, thank you all very much. I appreciate everyone's time.